What about now?
What does that do? Oh, we don't.
It's cascading. It's your computer. Okay, let's try now. Okay, you should try now.
How about this? Can you folks hear me now? Online? This is the joy of hybrid conference planning. There's always first session of the first day.
Perfect, it's working. Thank you.
Okay, we're on. Wonderful. Okay, yes, I love that analogy. It is like the first pancake at a pancake breakfast. All right, okay, it looks like we're all set. So thanks so much, everybody, for bearing with me. How is my volume for the people in the room? Okay, good. Volume okay for everybody online?
Yes, they said it's working.
Okay, amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here, everyone. I'm really grateful that you made the time to come and be here for my session today. My name is Haley Babb, and I'm an open education program manager with Spark. And today we are going to be together for about 2 hours. Oh, is that for me? Okay, that's the next room. We're going to be together for about 2 hours today. So I hope everybody filled up on their coffee, their water, they're ready to be comfy. If at any time you need to, go to the bathroom, leave, do whatever you need to do, please just feel free to do that. Yeah, we can go ahead and hop right into things. So I'm going to start just by saying a few words about Spark. This session is for all levels of folks who are involved in open education. I know we have some first-time attendees, folks new to open education in general. So I'm going to be giving a lot of background information on lots of different topics that we're going to cover today. So if you're not familiar with Spark, what we are is we're a membership organization. Primarily, I work for Spark North America, but we actually also have affiliate networks in Europe, Japan, and Africa. And we are a membership organization of libraries who come together, and we basically do advocacy around open education, but also open research and open data. So I work strictly in the open education side of things. I'm very interested in the access and data side of things. I would love to know more about it, but my specialty is in education. Yeah, I'm happy to go through a little bit more about me and why I'm qualified to be talking to you about this today. So some of you may have been able to pick up from my accent. I'm from Canada. This is a picture of me when I was a student leader at my university, and we would do some lobbying to our members of parliament. And so through some of our student lobby groups we received some formal advocacy training, and were able to be in some very good meetings with some elected officials in Canada. So I have a little bit of experience about this. Again, a lot of my understanding is from the Canadian context. I know things are a little bit different here in the US and across the world. So if any of my terminology throughout the presentation today is iffy, just please let me know, and we can adjust that. Yeah, I think without further ado, we will move along. So like I said, we're together for about 2 hours. We're going to get comfy. We're going to get to know each other a little bit. I'm going to have you do a little bit of paired work sharing together. So if that's not your vibe, be warned now. But I'm going to start off with a little bit of just a presentation from me. So we'll go into some basics of what is advocacy exactly. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about inclusive access programs. We put those in quotation marks because they can go by a lot of different names, as many of you know. But again, we're going to assume, sort of a beginner level knowledge today. So I'm going to take a few slides to go through what exactly these programs are and how we talk about them here at Spark. Then we're gonna get into the advocacy framework that Spark uses to lobby. Or to advocate, I should say. We'll distinguish between lobbying and advocacy in just a moment. So that's sort of broken into 4 different sections that you'll see down here. And then we'll wrap up with some quick, just sort of generalized advocacy tips. But we can take things very casually today. Like, I'm happy to stop at any time if things come up for discussion. Folks have more questions about a particular topic, please, like, I want you all to feel like you can engage and ask questions as needed. All right. We'll start very much at the beginning, just with what is advocacy. And I'll pause to see if anybody, either online or in person, wants to try and take an answer or answer that question.
You have to disable it. I thought I had made it. Sorry, Haley, we had a bunch of people in the waiting room.
Oh, that's fine.
Just give them a second. Okay. So, go.
Oh, thank you. So welcome to those of you just joining us online. We're happy to have you. We're just going over what is advocacy. So just about to get started into the meat of it. Would anybody like to take a crack at answering what they think advocacy is, either online or in class or in person? Yeah, right here.
Like speaking to the benefit of something, trying to, I guess there is a convincing element sometimes with like higher ups in education at least.
Yeah, so for those online, like a convincing of somebody or speaking to the benefit of something, and that's definitely true. Advocacy can mean a lot of things. This is a very gray topic, a very gray area. It's up to a lot of interpretation. A lot of advocacy is not cut and dry, and that can make it very confusing. And I think for folks who may be like trained certainly in a certain way, it can be hard to sort of think in an advocacy mindset, but that's the intent of what we're going to do today. Is I don't want you to leave here with a perfect understanding of like a technical definition of what advocacy is, but I want to shift your mindset a little bit to get into this advocacy brain. That's the goal of today's session. So how would I define advocacy? We would say it's taking some sort of action in order to influence change. So you yourself are not just creating an environment where something could happen, you are taking the action to influence another person, another party, etc., to make a change in your environment. So those are very important words, the action and influencing change. Where can advocacy happen? So I think a lot of the times when we think about advocacy, we think about like the people who go and talk to politicians or go and sit in a blazer and have their documents and, you know, go up to Capitol Hill, Parliament Hill, what have you, and talk to elected people. And that is advocacy for sure. But advocacy can happen in a lot of different places. Within your institution, absolutely, for you as an open education advocate. It can happen within your family. It can happen within your friends. You can advocate for yourself at the doctor's office. It's not limited just to the strict cut and dry definition of lobbying, which is what we consider the more government-focused approach to advocacy. So there's also different levels of advocacy that we can engage in. The first is self-advocacy, where you're going to be advocating on behalf of yourself. There's also individual advocacy, where you're advocating on behalf of another person. Perhaps you have a family member that you are advocating to in a government system or what have you. But we are going to be focusing today on what's called systems advocacy. So this is basically advocating to change a system on behalf of those who are impacted by the system. So I think generally we can say that this is students or faculty, librarians, what have you, a group of people who are influenced by a certain policy. Then we also have direct advocacy, which is directly communicating with decision makers in order to influence them, when you're sitting down with somebody and trying to change their mind. And we also have grassroots advocacy. So this is more where you're taking an approach to mobilize other people in order to influence decision makers, doing a campaign or some sort of coordinated effort to change somebody's mind. Any questions on any of that so far? So this is where I'm going to get into my note about advocacy versus lobbying. So I think a lot of people can be intimidated by advocacy because they think about these sort of lobbying parameters. Lobbying is a very, very specific type of advocacy. And this is associated again with influencing legislation or government officials. This often is highly regulated and varies by jurisdiction. So depending on what state you're in, what country you're in, etc., you're going to have very different rigid rules that you need to follow in order to do this. You probably need to be registered. There's a whole thing that goes along with it. That's not what we're going to be talking about today. So lobbying is a subset of advocacy for sure, but all of the things that we're going to cover today are going to be actions that you can take starting today at your institution. All right, so we're going to do our first discussion exercise to kind of break the ice. So something that we think about often at Spark is thinking about our advocacy why. Why are we doing this? Why is it important for us to take up this cause or this mission that we believe in? And this will be important because it's something that we're going to come back to at the end when we come through this whole framework. So for me, I think this became important to me because the way that like my student journey was structured was very untraditional. I worked a few different jobs going through my undergrad degree, and I required a lot of flexibility in my education. I was also the first person in my immediate family to go to higher education, and it was very, you know, I think my life would have taken a very different path had I not done that. So I think about that often when I'm doing advocacy on behalf of this and thinking about the things that come from my lived experience that encouraged me to want to do this work. So I would invite all of you, if you're online, maybe write a few comments in the chat if you're comfortable, perhaps turn to a partner beside you and just share a little bit about why open education and advocacy on this topic is important to you, and you know, where you want to go with it. So I'll take maybe 1 or 2 minutes to do that. And so, that's what it's really last and so I'm not to see. All right, we're gonna bring it back to the front quote. Thanks so much. I'm glad there's so much lively conversation. That's fantastic. I'm just gonna read a few responses that we got in the chat from our virtual attendees. So Gina Foster says our students have tremendous financial need, aren't represented in many course resources, and are more than ready to engage in co-creating resources and knowledge. Absolutely, I love that. Sammy Williams, advocacy in this topic is extremely important to me because I live in a very impoverished state and students often drop out because they can't afford textbooks. Kat Lee, mine also comes from making knowledge as accessible as possible. In today's climate, units should be affordable. Zero textbook cost is one way to do this. A lot of different comments about the cost of education, capitalism, and education that gets them where they want to go. I love that. So simple, but so true. And then just access. Yes. Totally. All right. Thank you so much for submitting those online. Are there one or two people in the room who'd like to speak a little bit to their why they feel this is important? And we'll get our host to run the mic over to you if you want to say a few words.
Yes, we need to use the microphone so virtual attendees can hear us.
Hi. So we were just sort of getting to this at the end, but both of us were talking about coming from backgrounds where you would need something like this to have access to education. And then the flip side of that is that becoming an academic, like becoming a professor, having that be your lifelong work, the way that that's structured, it's very expensive. And a lot of times people can't break into academia without some sort of generational wealth, without, it's not like, we get a lot of exceptions to that rule in a room like the one we're in today, because it's all people who care about this. But so the advocacy with the faculty as well of people who might not realize why we need this.
Beautiful, thank you. Anybody else? One in the back.
Morning. So I am a faculty in early childhood education, which is not a terribly high paying field. And I had a very difficult time having students pay a lot of money for books that, as much as the practice changes over the years, with it by in the beginning and 2 years later, we might be on to focusing on a different therapy. So that was my big reason why. And then the accessibility of the books and how I can update that information as things change. You know, for example, there was nothing in the textbooks about how to deal with children born and growing up during COVID. So that piece we had to create. And then I can still, as we're kind of coming out of it, still have access to update that. So that's my huge reason why. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. Okay. All right, well, thanks everybody for sharing a little bit about that. Like I say, I know that we are gonna move into focusing on some more technical stuff, but I feel like that's an important place to start because advocacy is a long-term practice. It's not something that you do once and then move on to the next thing. It's a lot of failure, a lot of picking yourself up and moving on to the next thing. So being able to really have a strong sense of why and something to ground yourself in and a lived experience to be able to speak from is very important. So thanks for engaging in that with me. All right. So I'm going to move on to our next topic, and that is just giving a little bit of background about what we at Spark call inclusive access programs. So for those of you who are not familiar, we run a website called inclusiveaccess.org. And we encourage all of you to go check that out and take a bit of a flip through it. But what this is this is a website where we like to post the facts about what we think these programs actually are and actually offer, and help you to think critically about the things that they claim to offer. So definitely take a look through that website if you're not familiar. But I want to just make sure that we're all on the same page about some definitions about these programs before we move into the next part of the program. And the reason that I want to talk about this is because I want to use this as a framing issue as we go through this advocacy framework. So the skills that you're going to learn today, they will be applicable to any advocacy topic that you want to take and use this from. This is going to be sort of like the through line that we're going to use as our examples all the way through. But if you want to take this and apply it to climate advocacy or, you know, health advocacy, you totally can do that. So anyway, just to lay some groundwork. So I've got a little bit of a slide here that lays out the difference between inclusive access programs and open educational resources. So both are, you know, available to students by day one of their course. OER typically are available at no cost to students, and they're typically free access forever. With a digital inclusive access subscription that students are often looped into, often of their attempt, it's a decision that's made by their institution. They do also receive this digital access by day one, but they're directly billed for the cost later. So we kind of call this like the Netflix subscription model of textbooks. Your institution will sign an agreement with a publisher or vendor, and you know they'll be billed a flat rate, and receive like access to their course materials for the duration of the semester. Typically, not always, but typically this access expires at the end of the semester. So students are not going to have, you know, perpetual access, which could be problematic if they're in like a professional program or they just want to keep the material that they've paid for. So this can be problematic for sure. Oftentimes the vendors will, they may offer you the option to print, but it's often at an additional cost, or there may be restrictions on how many copies can be printed. Whereas with OER, you are free to do that however you would like. I talked about access, typically expires after the course ends or retains forever. And then of course, the main difference is in the copyright. So inclusive access materials will utilize all rights reserved copyright, which, you know, obviously makes sure that they have the rights to use that however they want, and that's it. But OER are, of course, openly licensed for all of us to adapt, remix, reuse as we see fit. So there's two different types that this is often administered. And I would say throughout the US, we're seeing primarily the latter, which is this equitable access model. So typically when these programs were first emerging, they were offered on a course by course basis. So it was like a professor could opt into having their math course through an inclusive access program. But you would still have like traditional textbooks for your other courses. Whereas now this is more on an institutional level and you're buying into it at full scale for all of your courses. You don't really have a choice. So a lot of these programs are calling it equitable access. The reason we've got it in quotation marks is because we don't necessarily believe that that's the right terminology to be using. So it's basically just this course by course or all or nothing model. Course by course, you're going to be billed for the actual cost of your materials. Equitable access will be a flat fee. Opt out on course by course basis for the course by course. With equitable access, we find that this is often an all or nothing model, which is really hard because you know, you need your textbooks to succeed, as we all know. And yeah, they're often outsourced to one vendor. The textbook market, at least in the US, is an effective duopoly of two major publishers who control a vast majority of the market. So this is, you know, as we've seen massive price inflation, which is not great. Mandatory participation for faculty. And then, so in the course by course model, like there, you still have the opportunity to use OER if you're in a course where a professor is doing that. In equitable access, even if your professor assigns an OER to you, you're still going to get charged the fee to be part of that model. So just setting some groundwork so that everybody understands the difference between this. Does anybody have any questions on that? Okay.
So
Yeah, of course.
How widespread this equitable access thing is?
Yeah, so the question is, do we know how widespread equitable access is? And I would say, in my experience, I know a little bit about the US, a little bit about Canada. It's far more prevalent in the US than it is in Canada right now. You can go to sparkopen.org, which is our website, and we have actually an automatic textbook billing contract library where we have run FOIA requests for a lot of public institutions and obtained their contracts for these inclusive access programs. So you can actually go through, I think there's almost 100 contracts in there. You can see a little bit about what is involved there. But it is increasingly common. I think especially post COVID. There was a lot of need, of course, as we all know, to pivot to something that was immediately deliverable to students in a digital format. And that is completely understandable. We needed to do what we needed to do in the moment to get those resources to our students. But the problem now is we're seeing a lot of these institutions locked into these contracts long term and finding it very difficult to go back and get out. And because of the few amount of players in this market, it's often difficult to, you know, they have the ability to sort of increase prices year after year, which is a little bit difficult. So that's a long-winded answer to your question. It's quite prevalent. I would say, I would guess probably the majority of institutions are using this now, especially in the US, but it's gaining traction more outside. Yeah.
Are there companies that do course by course, like where I work, we have equitable access, I didn't know. Can you sign for a company that will do?
I think it's I'm sorry.
Oh, yes.
Virtually.
I was just asking if there are companies that do the course by course option instead of just the flat fee, all or nothing opt-in.
My understanding is that it's moved primarily to this equitable access now. The course by course was more common when these programs were just emerging. Before they sort of discovered that this model was something available that they could use. I think it does still exist in some cases, like there's some legacy contracts at a few institutions scattered around, but I would say most often it's transferred over to this equitable access. Yeah.
My question is, my current university uses a different name, but it is equitable access, and we have home broke internet. My question is, are universities mostly aware of the rate of OER in their own institutions? Because in my university, they don't. Like, they have absolutely no sense of portion as to how many sections, how many courses used. The only institution that's tracking that is the bookstore that is going to take advantage of them. And so, I know that Texas has implemented a new system for recognizing OER courses or no cost and no cost courses, but I don't think the institutions are actually taking advantage of this information. So do you have a sense of how many institutions actually know what the rates are?
I don't have a sense in terms of numbers. I think it's very dependent on the institution, also the state. There's certain states who are more involved in this at a government level. But you're certainly right. Like, I think the danger with these programs often is that students, librarians, other stakeholders are just simply not even involved in the discussions when these programs are being adopted. And so there's no opportunity to bring this forward. Yeah, we when we did that contract library, we can see like who is the signatory on the contract, and most often, yeah, it's a little. Most often it's like an administrative person, like high up, it's like a vice president or like a, what's the word I'm looking for, ancillary person. Very rarely is it like a librarian, a faculty member, like somebody who would know about open education. So our fear, of course, is that, like, you know, particularly for institutions who have put money into an OER program, who may not realize that they're going to adopt a program like this, it may be like cannibalizing that work or eating into it. So I have a whole slide about that later, but that's one way that you can bring this up to your institution, is to say, hey, you've already invested XYZ amount of money into a program like this. Do you know that there are risks associated with adopting a program like this and making sure that, you know, all that spending hasn't gone to waste? So while I don't have specifics for you on numbers, I can tell you that that is something that we see. Yeah, one more in the front.
Good morning, Haley. Just to switch gears for a moment, people often talk about Canada and the US like a set of twins who were separated at birth and raised by other people. Could you please, since you have this expertise to share with us as one of our North American counterparts, could you please share about some Canadian attitudes and actions, either about inclusive billing or advocacy about OER? Thanks.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I think it's, this is something that's growing in Canada. It's not quite at the point that it is in the US, but of course, there is a market, and it's something that the publishers, the vendors have discovered, and it's something that they're certainly tapping into and trying to break into that market as well. I would say that, attitudes among, you know, folks like the ones in this room are very similar. I don't think there's anybody in the OER space who's particularly thrilled about these programs. There's been some really great work done by Carl, which is the Canadian Association of Research Libraries, who has put out some advocacy statements around this and shared some awareness with some of the other provinces. And it's kind of on a case-by-case basis. Like, Canada is unique. There's no federal entity for education. It's all sort of done at the provincial level. So it really varies by province what's happening. But I think Carl has definitely been somebody who's been a leader, and we've appreciated working with them. Yeah, no problem. Okay, I'm gonna move us along for the sake of time. So we're gonna get into the meat of the session. So I hope you're all ready to get a little technical with me. Let me just check the chat to see if there's anything I wanna address. There's a lot of great comments. I wish I could keep them all. Okay. I'm going to introduce to you the Spark Advocacy Framework. And before I show it to you, I want to emphasize again that advocacy is a very malleable practice. There's lots of different ways to do this. So just because this is what we're teaching today doesn't mean it's the only way to practice advocacy. This is how we think about it. This is what works best for us. I hope that this can get you into an advocacy mindset. But remember that a lot of this is not black and white. A lot of the answers that I'm going to give you today are, it depends. So just keep that in mind as we go ahead. So the way that we think about advocacy at Spark is like this. So we make a point of defining what the problem is that we want to address. Then we write out what a potential solution would look like. So we're very clear on what is going on and what we would like to see happen. Then we set some goals, and this is sort of where most of the it depends work happens, because your goals will be constantly shifting. You're constantly going to be trying to achieve a goal. You may fail, you may need to redirect, you may reach a roadblock, etc. So goals are going to be something that you're continually scanning your environment and adapting to make sure that it fits. Then you're going to have strategies and tactics that you're going to employ in order to achieve your goals. And these are a little bit more nitty gritty. We'll talk a little bit about them more in a minute, but this is the very general framework that we're going to keep referring to over and over again. So, starting with the problem and solution, and this is very high level. We do this on purpose. I promise there's a reason for doing this. What we're going to do is I'm going to have a little worksheet that you're going to have a QR code link to access, and you're welcome to follow along with it if you wish. I'll show you what it is in just a moment. But we're going to go through each of the steps of these frameworks, and you're going to write some little blurbs for a specific issue that's going on at your campus. Maybe you're trying to start a like a OER fund. Maybe you're trying to put together a committee. Maybe you're trying to I don't know, it could be anything. Think about your own context and something that you're experiencing in your world, and we're going to use that example to sort of through line this framework. So you don't have to write it down right now, but think about what is a potential problem with the status quo that keeps the world for your campus or institution from how it should be. And this should be extremely high level, sky high. So this is things like affordability. It makes it problematic for students to afford, you know, education, which should be, you know, something that they're able to do. It could be access. The reason that we want to keep this sky high is because we're gonna write a statement that pretty much nobody can disagree with. So it can be like, and that's very hard. It's not gonna be 100% of the time that nobody disagrees with you, but it could be things like, students deserve to be educated if they want, or like very, very high level. Then we're gonna identify the broader change or series of changes that need to be employed in order to solve the problem. And again, it's gonna be something most everyone would agree with. I know that we live in questionable times right now. I'm not unaware of that, but we're gonna do our best to keep this as universal as possible. So, then we're gonna go into goals and affected parties. And like I said, the goal is the specific proposal or change that you wanna make that will advance the solution to your problem. It doesn't need to solve the whole problem. It can be a part of the problem, but you're inching towards that solution that's gonna make your problem better. And then I know we've all heard of SMART goals. I know it can be corny, but it's particularly important when you're doing advocacy work in order to make sure that you are creating a framework that's achievable for you. And you're setting a goal that's going to be something that you can realistically tick off, know whether or not you've achieved it. So you're not putting yourself in a cycle where you're running in circles and tiring yourself out. A note on affected parties. So these are people that we want to be aware of who are going to have some sort of say in your environment that you're scanning when you're putting together your goals. So these are all people that play some sort of role in the environment. Of course, there are students, faculty, librarians, parents of students, people who work in teaching and learning, instructional design, IT, et cetera, et cetera. And then we also have, you know, bookstore publishers, inclusive access vendors, policymakers. These are all people who live in the ecosystem. These are going to be broken into different types of affected parties. So you're going to consider each of these people differently and consider what role they play in your environment. So they may be beneficiaries of your advocacy work. They may be, so perhaps a student, you know, somebody who would be receiving the benefits of the work that you're doing. They may be allies, so people who are sympathetic to your cause and want to work with you. They may be opposition, people who want to fight against the work that you're doing. There's also decision makers, the people with the power to make choices that will change the environment that you're operating in. And then influencers, who are people who have sway with decision makers and may be able to influence them to make changes. And we're gonna say more about them in a moment. Then we'll get into strategies and tactics. Strategies are going to be your theories for how you're going to bring about the change that you seek to achieve. So this could be something like, so say my goal is, I want to start an OER task force. My strategy could be, I'm going to influence some folks in the space who are already interested in OER on my campus and encourage them to join the committee. My tactic is going to be a little bit more specific. So that'll be something like, I'm going to go up to Bill at the faculty meeting and ask him if he wants to join. It's a little bit more granular. And this can be really difficult to understand. It's kind of very much dependent. I'm going to show you a way to help you understand this in a few minutes. But just to go back to strategies, basically they typically involve influencing the person or process that decides whether change is made. And then the tactics are the specific actions that you're going to take. So it can often be tempting to skip ahead to the tactics step, because that's often what we think about when we think about advocacy. But there's a reason why we go through this whole framework and lay everything out. And so it's important to make sure that we're identifying what that is each step of the way. And then the very last thing we're going to do is actually go ahead and develop your ask. So once you've been through this whole roadmap, you're going to be able to write a statement that condenses your problem, solution, and goal into a short pitch that you can give to a decision maker or an influencer. We have to call this an elevator pitch, and I'll explain what that means in a moment. So being able to ask for things is a critical part of advocacy. It's, you know, the bread and butter of what we're doing here. when I go back to that definition that we originally wrote for advocacy, it's taking action to influence change. So it's things that you yourself don't necessarily have the power to do. You need to ask somebody with an access to a different sort of power to do something to change the environment. All right. So we're gonna start at the beginning with problem and solution. Which is the top of our framework. So, repeating these questions to you. What's the problem with the status quo that keeps the world from being how it should be? What is the broader change that could be made that would solve this problem? And why is this important right now? Here's an example problem and solution statement. This one's quite long. I would maybe condense this. This is an example from an old presentation. Students are borrowing more than ever to pay for education. As a result, millions of borrowers each year struggle to continue for their education, make important investments, pay for bills, etc. Students should be able to afford college without mortgaging their future. That's the solution, is, this should be something that's more affordable to students. Some tips to take into account when you're framing the problem. We want to state what's wrong with the status quo in terms that most people would be able to see and agree with. We also want to draw connections to broader problems and priorities on your campus, for example, that in something like a strategic plan. So if you have some sort of guiding document like a strategic plan at your institution, drawing connections to those can be really important. You can go to somebody and say, hey, I noticed that this is a priority for the university. This is a priority for somebody in a position of power. Here is how my initiative can help you achieve this, and here's exactly why. So this doesn't need to be expensive. Don't stress about it too much. This is just an exercise. But we're gonna practice writing it. And then really quickly framing the solution. State your vision for how the world or your campus should be, and broadly what change would get you there. And it should offer a full answer to the solution, but stay high level. More slides than I thought. Things to consider. Keep getting surprised by my own slide deck. The history and current reality of textbook prices, impact of course materials on equity outcomes. So more than just cost, there's equity issues to consider, internet access, technology access. But we are, of course, maximizing choice, agency for students, and just sort of not falling into the same trap all over again. Like, we don't want to continue to keep using these legacy models that may not be working. Okay, you get the idea. We're gonna move to the problem and solution roadmap. So this URL down at the bottom is gonna take you to a Google Doc that has a template of this roadmap. So if you choose to follow along, you can, or you can access this at any time and do it at home. But I'm going to pull this up. And is this attached to this video, this file? No, it's not, but I'm gonna, let's see, I'll put this up for you. There is a link to the slides directly within this. Oh, it's not gonna work for me. Oh, yeah, it is. We're just slow. So if you're able to get into this template, right here, there's going to be a link to the slides that you can open, and these are the slides that I'm presenting from right now. So you may see me in there. Make a copy of this document. So if you go up here to file, make a copy, you can make a copy on your own drive and follow through it on your own. But this is the general worksheet. If you're in the room and you just want to scribble on a piece of paper as we go through, that's fine too. So. Oh, sure. Yeah. I'll pop it in the same chat, and then this is the tiny URL that you can follow. So I'm just going to give you a moment. Either you can do it in partners if you want, or you can do it on your own. But just take a few minutes to write down what that problem and solution might look like to you. And here's the question again that I'll leave up. And if there's a particular slide you want me to show. Oh, that's pretty good. Oh, thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, if there's a particular slide you want me to show, let me know. Yeah. Is that better? Yeah.
Um,
They're just requesting access.
yes.
Yeah, I'll fix that for you.
Oh, wait, but it says to edit the files, they would make a copy.
Oh, yes, yeah, please don't edit the file.
Download it.
If you go up to make a copy of the file, you can save that on your own,
Download it.
your own Google Drive. Or you can simply just, write on a piece of paper and keep it to yourself. Okay, I'm gonna give it 2 minutes for you folks to go through that exercise.
Into the room, is that? I saw something in the chat, maybe.
Yes, I'm going to, if.
I'm just gonna stop sharing for one moment and check the permissions issue.
That's what I don't know. I don't know what I feel.
Sorry, folks, I'm working on the slide issue for those of you online trying to access. We're just having slow Wi-Fi. Okay, if you're trying to access the slides, you should be able to refresh them now and let me know if you're able to get in. Okay, so some people in there, looks like it's working. Yay! Yeah. Okay, and then I'm gonna direct link to the worksheet in the chat as well. Thank you to those of you sharing links in the chat, that's really helpful.
We're gonna plug it. It's never seen this was funny. I'm surprised.
Alright. Okay, sorry for the technical issues, folks. I'm gonna reshare my screen.
I think everybody, yeah, I think everybody. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. We're gonna pull everybody back. Get your attention, please. Thank you so much. Okay, sorry about the technical issues. I hope you've all had a moment to at least take some time to think a little bit about your problem and solution statement, whether or not it's in the document or just sort of on the side of your desk. Can I have one person online and one person in person who might like to share what their statements are? One brave soul. Sure, over here.
Is it okay if I ad lib it slightly? Because my
Absolutely.
wording is not perfect yet, but.
Absolutely.
So we have a course marking grant that we're trying to do, which is great, just for your background. And my big problem is, I'm from New Hampshire. They just voted to cut funding to the university system once again. And that is having a lot of very direct impacts. People aren't necessarily sure if they're gonna have a job. So getting faculty buy-in for anything other than the bare minimum can be very difficult right now. And the solution includes an acknowledgement that we might have to wait for, hi Trisha, I'm actually from Plymouth State, but yeah, I might have to wait for some of the dust to settle from some of this before we can really do that, but an emphasis on community might give people some worrying, like, but I don't know, it's really a hard thing to contend with.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. I liked your responses. I think the one thing I would maybe suggest is, and I haven't gotten to this yet, so this is not your fault, but the reason I think, you've made a really good point about community, and I think that's the meat of what we're trying to get at. You could draw your problem statement even a little bit higher level to say that, like, you know, we as a campus community have a commitment to ensure that learning is accessible, affordable for our students. And so the reason, again, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but the reason I'm having you do this exercise is because you may be in a situation where you take your ask to an administrator and they say, well, I don't think it's important that you have $10,000 to start this grant. So then you can say, well, here's our overarching problem.
Yeah, so that's the thing, we already have the grant.
Oh, okay.
The problem is,
I'm just.
that's why my problem is a smaller level.
Oh, I see.
Because the higher level was already taken care of. I can't go back any further without it being something someone's already done.
I see. Okay.
Repeating because I did not have the mic. So we already have a grant. That's why I'm not higher level. The highest level I started at was just, we're 50th out of 50 for educational funding, but I don't think I can personally fight the government, so. We're down to the current step of this local level problem, because people have solved everything that's solvable at a higher level than where I'm working right now.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, definitely appreciate that. Let's see. Yeah, no, that's super important. I think, you know, still emphasizing, like, it will become clearer as I go through the slides. But no, I appreciate you sharing a little bit about that. I'm gonna move on to some of the next material because maybe it will make this a little bit clearer. We're gonna skip that discussion question. And move sort of into goals a little bit. So one more thing about goals, and again, this information will enlighten the problem solution discussion. Our goal is our specific change that we want to make to advance the solution to the problem. So depending on how you scope your advocacy, you brought up a really good point about how this happens at a lot of different levels, and things may already happen at one level, so the scope of your advocacy may get bigger or smaller. Your goal will change depending on what that is. But all in all, a goal is the specific proposal or change that you want to make that's going to advance your solution to your problem. It's not something that you have the power to change yourself. We talked about that already. It's influencing somebody else to do that. And we talked about SMART goals. Before you set your goal, here is some context of things that you may want to consider. So your problem and solution statements are going to stay relatively unchanged throughout your whole advocacy journey. Given that, there's not major changes. That times are strange right now. Lots is happening. Everything's up in the air. But your goal should be determined based on your environment and should be adaptable to changes within it. So this is the thing that's going to be flexible depending on whether you lose funding, whether you experience mass layoffs, whether you have new legislation come in that you have to follow. Your goal is going to navigate around different roadblocks like that, but you're always going to have this problem that you're working to solve, which could be affordability, it could be equity, it could be access, those sorts of things. So ensuring that your goals are adaptable to your environment based on what's happening to you, these things that you cannot control. So we're going to take a few minutes to inventory our environments and figure out what we have, what we can work with, what might be a roadblock for us. So who or what is going to be at my disposal to advance my advocacy goal? Who is already on my team? Who doesn't need convincing? Who has sway with some of the important decision makers? Who has access to resources that I can use? Who has, other things available to me that will help me get further in my endeavor? These are all things that we want to consider when we're drafting our goal. And there's a few different ways that we can formulate our goal. We have a little bit of a formula that we can use. So thinking about what is the solution to my problem, knowing the tools that I have at my disposal, how do I move towards that solution in a smart way? So something that's specific, measurable, achievable, time-bound, what have you. We like to recommend that you state your goals in a specific formula. It doesn't have to be this way. Again, this is just the SPARK method. But formulating it in a statement that says, getting X to do Y often helps. So you are getting X person, X initiative, X group, what have you, to do Y action. You can replace those variables as you need. Really quickly, just an overview of the SMART goal. We want this to be something very specific that you can achieve. You want it to be measurable. You're able to know whether or not you have achieved it or have some sort of measure to, measure that. You want it to be achievable, but I'm actually going to add second A. You also want it to be a little bit ambitious. So achievable within the realm of reality, reach a little bit higher. So an example that we like to use is particularly with funding. Let's say that you need X amount of money to start up an initiative. Let's say it's $1,000. We'll go small. It's always worth asking for $2,000 and seeing what you can get. But oftentimes they're going to try to meet you in the middle. So they'll say, we can't give you your full ask, but we can give you a portion of it. Always ask for a little bit higher than what you need. You want it to be relevant to the thing that you're trying to make happen. And you want it to be time bound. You need to know, whether or not you've achieved it in a certain amount of time. So again, I know most people are familiar with the SMART goals, but just to have a little bit of a refresher. And we're going to use this formula of getting X person, entity, whatever, to do Y thing. So your X variable in this formula is going to be your goal targets. So this could be, if you're lobbying, doing the whole government thing, could be Congress or the state or provincial legislature, an individual policymaker. It could be campus administration, somebody within there. It could be a textbook affordability committee or an individual on that committee. It could be the chemistry department. It could be so-and-so librarian. It could be a certain amount of things, but this is what you're trying to influence. Oh, I take that back. It's usually not a specific person, getting ahead of myself. This is gonna be the people that you typically approach in your tactics. So, and then again, at the bottom, there's lots of caveats to this, don't take these as strict exclusions. Your goal proposal, why? Is gonna be things that you wanna do, so for example, you want to stop the inclusive access program. You want to exempt OER courses from a flat fee equitable access program, you wanna say, you know, if our professor uses OER, they can opt out of that specific course. Just an example, something to consider. You could want to establish a course marking system. You could want to establish OER in your tenure and promotion policy. You could want to secure funding for an OER grant program. These are things that are typically not goal proposals, usually. Again, lots of caveats. Advocacy is very gray. Something like create more OER, it's not measurable. It's sort of more of a generalized target. You're not really knowing whether or not this is achieved. We want to be more specific than that. Increasing the use of OER, again, a little bit too general. We don't know whether or not we've achieved that. Raising awareness, what does that mean, really? Conduct research. We want a specific plan for what we're trying to do. We want to try to be very specific about an action that we're going to take. So we're gonna go through a really quick exercise and we can just speed round this, but this is a fun game of is it a goal? Increasing OER adoption, yes or no? Just a quick
No.
no. So that is no. It's gonna be, we need it to be a little bit more measurable. We need it to be time bound, that sort of thing. Running a statewide survey about OER and student success. No, we need more of these smart variables. It's getting there. It's better than the last one. We want to make sure it ticks every single one of these smart or specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound. So we want to see definitely some more time bound things on there, etc. Establish a statewide OER grant program of $10,000 by next year.
Is it achievable?
Yes. And that's gonna vary depending on, you know, where you're at, right? Yes, that is a goal. All right. We're gonna go back to the cursed template. Or just, you know, you can just write, you can follow along with the slides. I'll leave this slide up and you can just write off the side of your desk. We're gonna take another 2 minutes based on your problem and solution statement. Write out a quick goal, something that you'd like to achieve, on your campus related to this, and we're gonna give 2 minutes for that.
So can a goal be researching if your solution is even possible, or is the baseline that you've chosen a solution that you know is an actual option.
The question is, can a goal be like researching if your solution is possible?
Yeah.
We want a goal to be more like as a step towards the solution. So that's probably, I would say probably not. That's gonna be more of like the inventory work that we're doing. To, you know, see what's going on. So when we're doing our, like the inventory or environment slide, like what's at my disposal? Is this gonna be possible? Your goal should be a little bit more, working towards achieving that, if that makes sense. All right. We'll pull it back to the room. Thanks, folks. You can keep working as I'm talking, but maybe we did in person last time, so maybe I'll get somebody online if you'd like to share your goal statement in the chat. One brave volunteer. Hey, anybody online want to share their goal statement? Okay. Seeing none, I'm gonna turn to somebody in the room. Would anybody like to share? I'll run my mic over to you. So you can't see me online, but you can hear me still, hopefully.
Hello, so at my institution, we just moved from an independent bookstore to a not. So my SMART goal was to stop the implementation of equitable access, because we're assuming the next 2 years of our 5-year contract, they will push it very, very hard.
Thank you. The statement would be stop the implementation of equitable access, is that correct? All right. I like the goal. It's a good goal. We want to make sure that it's still following SMART. So down at the bottom, we have specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound. So you could improve it by saying something like, we want to stop the implementation within the next quarter, or by the, that's a little bit ambitious. You know, making sure that we're including these parameters as well, but thank you for sharing. Okay. Before we move down the framework, we're gonna stop and do a little bit more on that affected party slide that we talked about earlier. So I want to just come back to this and make sure that we have a good understanding before we move into the next section, because it's going to involve them. Oh, sorry, there's a question back here. If you just wait 1 minute, we'll get you the mic.
Thank you for letting me interrupt. For something like what was just shared as a goal, I see that as a continual battle that's happening. How do you have any advice about how to write that into a goal, that this is it's a never-ending goal?
Welcome to advocacy. Yes. So depending on what your goal is, your goal shouldn't truly be never ending. It should have something that you are eventually going to achieve that you can check it off. But I understand what you mean, like a goal can be a very large goal. So that's when we're gonna break it up into strategies and tactics to achieve the goal, which we'll cover in a moment. But ultimately your goal should be something that you can achieve, and it can change, it can redirect, it can be, you can say, okay, we were gonna do this in 6 months, now we'll do it in a year. We were gonna have the whole institution not sign on, now we're just gonna focus on the math department. Like it can be flexible within that, and it can and should change frequently. Like you will approach somebody with your ask, who more often than not is probably gonna tell you no. And you're gonna have to redirect and try something else. So those things should and can and should happen, but ultimately your goal should be something that is achievable. That makes sense.
Thank you.
Of course, yeah, no problem. Okay. So we're about halfway through our time together, which is good. We're on track. We're gonna dive into affected parties. So, in order to advocate for change, we need to know how it will affect people within the system and whose minds we need to change. Even if the change is the right thing to do in our minds, there are likely to be people to oppose it, as we all know. That's not a surprise to many of us. So, here's the slide that I showed you earlier that has this list of all these people who live in our ecosystem. We're going to talk about a few of them in particular. And an important part of advocacy is being able to put yourself in the shoes of somebody else and to consider the things that are important to them, what they're thinking about on a day-to-day basis, what it means to live in their world. So, as we all know, things that matter to students, this is certainly not an exhaustive list, but this is just some things when it comes to course materials. They're going to care about the cost. They're going to care about whether it's accessible. They're going to care about whether it's relevant to their context, responsive to their needs, whether it reflects the world that they live in. They're also going to care about how convenient it is to access. So these are just a few things, again, not an exhaustive list, but if you're a student approaching this work, this is likely the things that are top of mind for you. We can also do this for faculty. So again, not an exhaustive list, context dependent, but some things that may matter to faculty are things like the quality of materials, the ease of how easy it is to adopt them and implement them, what it actually looks like in their day-to-day practice of teaching. What support materials, test banks, ancillary resources are available to them. And, you know, I think faculty are considering how, you know, affordable, accessible these are to students as well. So just two examples, we can do that for, you know, our whole list of folks. This is a refresher slide. We have the different types of affected parties, people who benefit from the goal, allies who support the goal, opposition who oppose the goal, decision makers who make the decisions, and influencers who influence the decision makers. I have another slide I want to show you. Let's go to this instead. So from this list, we can identify who's likely to be an ally and who's likely to be opposition. Again, this varies. This is context dependent, as with everything. A lot of it depends, a lot of gray. But generally, can I get some people to just like shout out who they think might be an ally in our cause?
Librarians.
Librarians. Woo, go librarians. Teaching and learning. Students. Instructional designers.
Parents.
Yes. How about opposition? Vendors. Some faculty.
Bookstore.
Bookstore, administration. Yeah, and sometimes they can be both, like, depending on the issue. There's so much to this. This is general, very general. Students, librarians, parents, teaching, learning, a lot of the ones that we shouted out. I think faculty can go both ways sometimes. Employers, again, depending on what you're asking for, but just to get you thinking about this as an exercise. How about decision makers and influencers? This one could be a little bit more tricky. Who would some of our decision makers be?
Faculty.
Administrators, yeah, somebody said faculty, that could be.
Possibly bookstore.
Yeah, possibly bookstore.
Legislators.
Legislators, big time. Okay, how about influencers, people who have sway with the decision makers? Students, absolutely. Parents, big time. Yeah. Faculty, authors. Again, general responses. Just because it's not highlighted doesn't mean it's not true, but you know, these are some ones that we can pretty safely say. Okay, so when we're thinking about affected parties, we want to make sure that we're understanding the motivations of the goals that this person is trying to achieve. So we have our own set of goals, so do these people. We talked about, you know, like what students might be thinking about, what faculty might be thinking about. It's also important to get into the mind of a decision maker and try and see things from their perspective, what they might be thinking about, what they may care about. So earlier we talked about things like strategic plans at institutions. They have a specific set of things that they are trying to achieve in their role. They are also thinking about their personal success as a person in their career, as we all are. So things to consider are, you know, what are the goals that they're trying to achieve? What does success in their role look like, both on a professional level and on a personal level? Where is there overlap in my goals and their goals? What is the area in the middle where we can sort of meet each other? And how can we work together towards a shared vision of what we think is correct or right? This is tricky. And it encourages, or it requires a lot of knowledge of the environment and, you know, and I think, advocacy is often most effective when it's done, in collaboration with different groups working together. So, you know, library may know some things, faculty may know some things, student may know some things. It's good to have, a group of people working together who can sort of piece together the environment. So, I'm gonna go, that's a little bit about, affected parties. I'm gonna stop and see if there's any questions. Okay. I'm gonna go back. I messed up the order of my slides. So we're gonna go back to strategy and tactics. So this is where it gets a little sticky depending on what your goals are. Your strategy is going to be your theory for how you're bringing about the change that you seek to achieve. Your tactics are the specific actions that you're going to take to implement your strategy to achieve your goal. When you're thinking about a strategy, here's what you should consider. How does the change that you identified in your goal get made, and what is the process? Who are the key decision makers? Not just generally, but specifically relevant to your goal that you want to achieve. And who or what could influence them to want to make the change? What's in it for them? That's the big question that's going to be the through line through all of this, is we want to know what's in it for this person. Why should they want to help me, and how can I serve that up on a silver platter? Back to inventorying the environment. I also want to note, this is my favorite slide in the whole presentation. I want to talk a little bit about the strategy scale, as we call it, when you're talking to people who are decision makers and who you're trying to influence. There's a certain amount of pressure that you want to apply when you're engaging in advocacy, and there's definitely a too much and there's definitely a too little. So in a situation where we're applying too little pressure, we don't want to just create an environment where somebody might do something. Remember back to our original definition of advocacy, we want to make sure that we are taking action to advance a change. So there's a lot of things that we can do that are important to lay the groundwork for advocacy and that we can and should do. But the journey doesn't end there. That's, you know, we need to actually make encourage the person to make the change. So when we create a climate where someone is likely to do something, that's things like we've put out a survey and presented them some information. We have handed them a brochure. We have given them a presentation about something that's happening on the campus. And again, these are all very important things. These are things you should do. This is part of advocacy. But actually taking it a step further is making the ask and having a specific thing that you want from them and pressuring them, encouraging them to do it. So that's the middle area where you want to live, is you want to be persuading, incentivizing, and applying a little bit of pressure to people. And you will know when that can be too much, hopefully. It's a very sort of interpersonal game. Like you may have a person that you have in mind who's like, this is the person whose minds I need to change, and you know what your relationship is like with that person. It's the same as, you know, any sort of interpersonal relationship. Like you will know when things are off and things feel weird and you are pushing too hard. So we don't want to ever admonish people for not doing what we want them to do, because ultimately that relationship is the most important thing. As soon as that person is discrediting us or distrusts us, the relationship is done and we no longer have sort of direct access to that person. And again, this is also so context dependent, so personal. Like these are unique relationships that you folks know how to navigate. But we oftentimes you're gonna be in a situation, again, like I said, you're gonna be coming to them over and over again, and with new goals, new asks, and so we wanna make sure that that line of communication remains open. And I'm gonna be sharing tips with you to teach you how to do that. So we wanna live somewhere in the middle. We don't wanna just be creating a climate, we wanna take action, but we don't wanna push too hard to where we deteriorate the relationship. And then this is the big question I want you to take away. What's in it for them? How can you frame the thing that you want to be the thing that they want? Okay. And then these are the slides that we went through already. And once we have, the reason I want to talk about affected parties with strategies is because that's usually where we'll be involving another person. Tactics is going to come after that. So these are like the quick advocacy things that we're doing. Who or what among our allies and resources is most likely to influence our decision maker? What are the specific actions that we can take to put our allies and resources to best use? How can we recruit additional influencers? This is where it gets fun. You want to make it easy for them to say yes. You want to come to them with a fully thought out proposal, something that you would like to see. They may tweak some things, they may have some suggestions for you, but it is your responsibility as an advocate to say, hey, this is what needs to be done. This is the gap in service or whatever that I've identified. And here's the solution that I am bringing to you. It's more effective to do it that way than to go to someone and to say, hey, we have a problem here, please solve it. You're gonna have better success if you come up with a potential solution on your own and propose it to them, and even better if it's something that you or your allies or your working group can implement. Because ultimately all we need from this person is their sign off, is their check mark, their whatever. So while it is more work for us, that is unfortunately the reality of advocacy. That's what we sign up for when we become advocates. So we want to make it easy for them to say yes, and that can include a lot of things. One of them is making them look amazing, making them look like a champion. So this is particularly relevant for politicians, which again is not what we're focusing on, but how can we frame it as a championship opportunity? How can we say, oh, Professor so-and-so, we're so grateful that you employed this OER program and you've helped so many students and we're so grateful. We're gonna do a feature in whatever blog, we're gonna give you a student award, etc. Those are the things that are gonna make people more interested in doing this work. And of course, these are things that we all want to, right? So we want to frame it as a championship opportunity for them. We want to be okay with sharing the spotlight, which can be tricky. But unfortunately, it's something that in advocacy is pretty common. And then, like I mentioned before, do as much groundwork as possible so that the ask doesn't make more work for them. I'm gonna skip this for time. Okay. We're into the last section of the roadmap. And just take a quick 2-minute break. So now that you have your advocacy goal, identify a relevant stakeholder, affected party, person. You may have somebody in your mind, it may be, a group, whoever. Write out what you think their motivations might be in relation to your goal. Where is the overlap that exists? Where can you find the common ground? And how might their interests align with yours and how might they conflict? So we'll take 2 minutes just to do that really quickly. Think probably have some good work going on. Okay, we'll do one more. Ask if anybody would be so brave to share their statement.
Okay, so my goal, or let's see, my goal was to establish at least one complete Z degree for our campus to be implemented in 27-28. So I said that one of our stakeholders should be the anthropology department because many of the faculty are already using OERs. And just like the committee, they're motivated to support students with access to free and open resources, and challenges would be any time that we have to commit.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that. That sounds great. All right. I hope it's helpful to sort of think about it that way. Like, we've got our goal and now we're going to apply it in our environment. Okay. So we've been through our problem and solution, we've been through our goal, we've been through our strategies and tactics. I think for the sake of time today, we're not going to do some strategy I'm not going to make you write out a strategy or tactic, but we'll talk about it all together. But I just want to bring us back to the framework because now hopefully we're going to tie this all together in a way that will help take everything we've gone through and make it make sense. So this is our framework in action. We've identified a problem, and this is just an example. So problem, textbooks are expensive, etc. For example, a solution to this problem is that we could expand the use of OER in order to benefit students. A goal might be something like establishing a statewide OER grant program. A strategy might be to convince a coordinating board or governing body or what have you of the return on investment to say that, you know, let's implement this, it will save so much amount of money. And then a tactic could be to gather the savings data from faculty, to share that with folks, what have you. So again, that's where like that data piece, it's an important part of advocacy, but it's not the whole picture. So what we're going to do is flip this framework backwards in order to test it to see if it's going to work. So this is called the in order to test to see if your advocacy is going to work. So what we'd like to do is start at the bottom. So our tactic is to gather savings data from faculty in order to convince the coordinating board or governing body the return on investment, in order to establish a statewide OER grant program, in order to expand the effective use of OER in order to benefit students, in order to solve the problem of textbook affordability. So this is just one way that you can take your work, what you've written, flip it backwards to see if that sort of lines up and builds upon itself. Because I know that framework can be tricky. Responding to roadblocks. I've alluded to this a little bit. You are indefinitely or not, like certainly going to come up on roadblocks, on things that happen. So if one tactic doesn't work, you can go back to your strategy and come up with another action to try. So this is like a much harder analogy, which is another roadblock. If your strategy doesn't work, go back to your goal and come up with another theory for how to reach it. Again, we're going back up the ladder. So this is like the go around the roadblock analogy. If it seems that your goal is no longer achievable or something happened, this is maybe goes back to the question we had earlier. Go back to your solution and pick another way to advance this. You're doing a new route to your solution, if that makes sense. And once we have all of this together, we can actually go ahead and make our advocacy ask. So why is asking important? You yourself are the subject matter expert when it comes to this. You are the person in this job day in and day out. You know what it's like to work with students. You know what it's like to experience these issues firsthand. Your lived experience, expertise is expertise and should be considered as such. I remember going into my first ever lobby meeting and feeling very insecure. I was quite young, early 20s, being like, you know, I'm just a girl, a student at school, like, what am I gonna say that a powerful legislator will already know? And the answer to that was a lot, because things had changed since that person had been in school. You know, they had a different experience than me, and it took a lot for me to learn that, you know, my lived experience, my day-to-day knowledge as an advocate is powerful, is knowledge, and I want all of you to feel empowered to feel that same way. So oftentimes these high-level decision makers who can be policymakers or can be administrators, they see the big picture. They manage a lot of different things at once, but they're not always seeing the day-to-day details. So you are the person who's in the day-to-day details, and it's your job to help them understand. And so things that might seem obvious to you might not always be obvious to them. So like, I don't know, I had a crazy experience where I sat down with a legislator and talked about the cost of textbooks, which I thought everybody knew, and he was just floored. He couldn't believe it. He didn't have kids who were in school. He hadn't been in for a long time. And so that was something that was so commonplace to me, but you'd just be surprised at what people don't know. So you have to assume a very basic level of knowledge. And so, you know, giving them the information is empowering, but when you make the ask after explaining that to them, that catalyzes decisions, which is how things change. You'll make many different types of asks during your advocacy efforts. So it'll be big and small. You'll be making asks of your allies, influencers, decision makers. Your ask might be a direct ask towards your goal, or it may just be a strategic step on the way there. But either way, we want to develop something called an elevator pitch to support your ask that includes a justification relevant to the person you're asking. I don't know. Oh, this is funny. Sorry. This is like an internal language that we use, but we call it a crap ask, even though it's the opposite. It means it's a good ask, but you want it to be concrete, reasonable, but still ambitious and possible for the person to grant. You want to scope your ask, consider who you're asking and what you're asking for. Focus on that overlap between reasonable and ambitious. And it's the same kind of thinking that we do when we're drawing our goal. We want it to be reasonable, but we also want to reach a little bit higher. When asking for something quantitative, a good rule of thumb is to ask for twice what you need, or, you know, scale this to what's reasonable. If you're asking for like $50,000, maybe ask for $60,000. And brainstorm backup asks that can help advance your goal that might be easier to say yes to. So say, what's an example? Like you want to put together a task force and you want people from all different departments, and they say, well, we can't give you one from everybody. Can I at least have, you know, somebody from each major session, what have you? Have a backup prepared that might be easier for them to agree to. So framing your ask. Finding your voice is super important, and this goes back to what I said about your own lived experience. And if there's anything that you take away from this presentation, I hope it's this sort of stuff. But it's very important to just stay grounded in where you are coming from on this issue and what motivates you to advocate. So that's why we talked about the why at the very beginning. Like, why are we here? Why is this important to us? What do we want to achieve? Good advocates come across as very human. Like we try to humanize what we're doing and create meaningful relationships between people. So like I mentioned, your lived experience is just as important as technical knowledge of what's happening on campus. Your anecdotal experience is valuable. And you can never be wrong when you speak from your own experience. If you say, this is what I experienced, this is what life is like for me, nobody can ever tell you that you're wrong or fight you on it. And remember, at the end of the day, everybody involved in this is just people. People are doing what they think is the right thing. They're trying to advance the world in the way that they know how. So knowing when to make our ask, some factors to consider include external deadlines, order of operations, how busy the person you're asking is. Oh, that should be your RE, that's a pet peeve. You don't always control the timing of an ask. Having ask prepared will allow you to seize opportunities. That's why we prepared the elevator pitch, and that's why we call it the elevator pitch, because in the lobby world, if you're walking around a government building and you get stuck in an elevator with a legislator, you have 30, 45 seconds to really quickly give them your spiel while they're stuck in there and can't get away from you. So having that sort of thing prepared that you can sort of give off the cusp is very helpful. And so using your judgment, if when asked feels premature, scale it down to something smaller. If you feel like they're very receptive to what you're saying, ask for more. It goes both ways. And then most important that I want to emphasize is do not ask for something unless you are confident that you can do your part to follow through with if you get a yes. So if you say, I want money for this initiative and I will do X, Y, Z to make it happen, you better do what you committed to saying you're going to do, because that's what's going to strengthen the relationship and strengthen the trust. So if it's something that you are not confident that you can follow through on, make sure that you scope that beforehand. Okay, here's our pitch, elevator pitch formula. And unfortunately, I don't think we're going to have time to practice them together, but I want to make sure that we go through it so you know what it is. You can start off with a hook, which is like a relevant statistic, news story, thing that happened today, point of flattery, whatever it is that you need to get their attention. You want to state the problem in terms that they care about. You want to state the solution, presented in a way as they might see it, and then you can go ahead and make your ask. So it can be something like, oh, Chancellor Janet, I loved your speech today that you made about student affordability. Since you care about that so much, here is a statistic from, our specific institution. And here's something that I propose that might make it better, that sort of thing. So just a little way to think about putting that pitch together. I'm going to skip the discussion questions for time. I'm going to skip that for time. Apologies, that's the fun part. And I'm going to end on just some quick advocacy tips, so that we can have a little bit of time at the end for questions. So when you ask for something, you're going to get either a yes or a no or a maybe. Responding to no, you want to make sure that you play out the conversation in advance and have some backup asks that might be easier for that person to accept. If you get a hard no, we can refocus the conversation by saying, how can we work together on this instead? And that's where, when we make those problem statements, that can be a grounding point that you can come back together to and say, okay, well, if it's a no this time, can we at least agree that this issue is a problem? And hopefully the answer is yes. And then it's, how can we reroute this direction in order to get there in a way that works for both of us and open that conversation? And they may have some information that they can share with you of things that might be available that you haven't already thought of or know of. Be careful about pushing back. If you get a no again, this is that pressure scale. If it begins to feel tense, it's always better to just say, okay, thank you for your time. I'll follow up later. Usually better to re-strategize than risk a deteriorated relationship. And a note about follow-up, I think I get to later, but follow-up is actually kind of a good thing. If you have to end a meeting early and say, oh, I'll email you about this later, you have a point of contact and you have an excuse to get in touch with them, right? So like, I'm getting ahead of myself, but there's another slide later that says, don't ever say anything, but don't make up a statistic, right? If you don't know the answer to something, oh, I don't have that off the top of my head right now, but I'd love to, go back and get that to you later. You're opening the door for another point of contact with that person, and that's a good thing. So focusing questions after no, do you agree that this is a problem? We just talked about that. Are there any circumstances, and what are they, under which you could see yourself supporting this? That's a great question to ask. Is it possible to get you to a yes? What would it take? What proposals would you support in order to address this problem? One way to take a meaningful step in the right direction is X, Y, Z. Would you support that? all these redirecting, going around, rerouting, roadblock metaphors. If you get a yes, this is obviously best case scenario. Don't keep trying to convince them. You've got the yes. Say thank you, move straight into next steps. If it's appropriate, definitely send a thank you note, even if it's just an email, or if you're really comfortable with this person, a text. Not only is it polite, but it's also kind of sneaky because you're memorializing their yes in writing. So you can say, thank you so-and-so for agreeing to this. Here's my understanding of what we agreed to. Happy to take next steps to make this happen. I'll follow up with you on this date. You've set up some targets and memorialize that in writing so that 2 weeks from now, when they say, oh, I don't remember that conversation, you can point that to them. Don't assume that yes means done. You're the person who's responsible for following up and staying on top of things. And we've already talked about the importance of following through on what you promise. And then I think this is my last slide. Managing your own expectations. This is a big one, and this is something that I would love to do a whole thing on, is like advocate self-care, because it's very important. The thing I want to leave you with is just the fact that advocacy is very much a long-term practice. It's something that we're continually tweaking, re-strategizing. It's not something we try once and then stop. You're going to hit roadblocks. You're going to be told no. It will be difficult. Other people will take credit for your achievements. It happens. It's essential to constantly be re-strategizing, refocusing, depending on the changes in our environment. And I think especially in a time like we're living in right now, there's a lot of things that make it very difficult to feel like we are able to push forward in the way that we want to. So something that I really want to leave with you, and something that I think is important on our team as well, is when we get a win, celebrate it thoroughly. And like, shout it from the rooftops, make sure everybody knows. Very important to do that. Not only is it good for you to, feel like you and your team have done great work, but it's empowering for other people in the space to see, change is possible, and we're moving forward and we're taking steps towards this shared vision that we're all working on together. And, especially important when success depends on other people taking the credit, like if there's internal things that you can do to just make sure that you take a moment and celebrate that, it's so important. And then just take care of yourself. It's rough out there. That's all I'll say on that. Yeah, thank you. That's the end of my formal. So that's a lot of content. Actually, what I didn't mention at the beginning is this is based off of a 4-week training that we have been piloting. So I've done my best to condense that into 2 hours, which is probably why it feels like that was a lot of information. So thanks for bearing with me on that. We are investigating ways to offer advocacy training at Spark. And we've done 2 iterations of that pilot program for our Spark members. And trying to figure out a way to make that sustainable. So if something like this is something that you're interested in seeing more of, if you have suggestions on how we can offer it or present it better, it's something that is, a work in progress. So feedback is definitely appreciated. And if you're interested in staying up to date with more Spark initiatives, I've got some literature at the front. We produce every year, we do a state policy playbook. So it's suggestions that you can employ in your state, or, for Canadians, there's stuff that we can take inspiration from as well. So I encourage you to grab some of those. There's some more at the table in the main room beside Rebus as well, if these go out. But definitely encourage you to check out the Spark website for other resources that we have as well. So thanks so much for spending the 2 hours with me this morning. We'll stay and take a few questions, but yeah, thank you.
Haley, would you like to start here in the room or the virtual attendees?
Maybe I'll take 1 or 2 virtual attendees if that's okay. Lots of thank yous. Thank you, guys. Any advice for dealing with situations where you get ghosted? By the people that you're trying to make an ask of, especially if they seem interested, open, and interesting. Oh boy, I think this is bound to happen. Like, people are very busy, right? And there's a lot going on, I think, and especially in today's higher ed landscape, like this is obviously a very important issue, but it's not the only issue. There's lots of very major things happening in higher education right now, big time. I think if you are being ghosted and it's by somebody who is not expressing interest, I think you can gauge whether or not you think there's a potential lead there and whether it's worth your time or whether it's worth redirecting your advocacy efforts. But this person says, especially if they did seem interested or open initially, I think putting yourself in situations where you can catch them in person, like again, this like elevator situation is important. I think just being persistent, like this is just part of it. Unfortunately, it's tough. We can utilize our influencers here, like if we know somebody who has sway with them, somebody who we know is in meetings or rooms with them often, that's a strategy we can employ, putting ourselves in spaces where they may be, offering them some kind of incentive, like if you want to participate in this, you know, maybe it's doing that champion angle, like a feature in our student newspaper or an award or something like that. What is the thing that they want out of this and how can we make it more of a carrot than a stick? That's some of my suggestions, but that's, you know, this is a hard thing and it's been, so totally get that. I think that's the only question in the chat right now. Any in person? Hopefully that means I was very thorough. Okay, thanks, everybody. I'm gonna set you all free.
Thank you.
And I hope you have a wonderful experience the rest of the conference.
And thank you, all of you who supported on the chat and also here in the room. Thank you, Dan. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, everybody online. Sorry, I really great to see you all. Sorry.